The gunshot that shattered Emma Zimmerman's hip when she was 14 years old defined the next 6 years of her life in ways that went far beyond the physical. It was 1878 in Julian, California, a gold mining town nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains where the air smelled of pine and possibility, and where people measured worth by how fast you could work, how straight you could stand, and how little mercy they needed to spare. Emma had been caught in crossfire between two drunken miners outside the general store, an innocent bystander whose only mistake was being in the wrong place when tempers and whiskey mixed into violence. The bullet had torn through muscle and bone, and though the doctor saved her leg, he could not save her from the pronounced limp that would mark every step she took for the rest of her days. Now 20 years old, Emma had learned to read the faces of strangers before they even opened their mouths. She could see the pity in the downturned eyes of the church women, the dismissal in the flat stares of potential employers, and worst of all, the cruel amusement of those who found entertainment in the suffering of others. Julian was not a large town, perhaps 300 souls on a good day when the miners came down from the hills with gold dust in their pockets and thirst in their throats. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew Emma as the girl who could not walk right, the girl whose father had drunk himself to death 2 years after her injury, the girl whose mother had remarried and moved to San Francisco, leaving her daughter behind with an aunt who saw her as nothing more than an obligation and a burden. Emma worked at the Silver Creek Hotel, a 2-story establishment that catered to travelers, miners, and the occasional businessman passing through on the way to San Diego. Her job consisted of cleaning rooms, changing linens and scrubbing floors, work that left her hip aching and her leg throbbing by the end of each day. The hotel owner, Mrs. Abigail Crawford, was a stern woman in her 50s who ran her business with efficiency and little warmth. But she paid on time and did not mock Emma's disability to her face, which was more than could be said for many others in town. The mocking came mostly from a group of young men who congregated outside the Silver Bell Saloon, cowboys and ranch hands who worked the cattle spreads in the valleys below Julian. They had nothing better to do with their evenings than drink, gamble, and make sport of those they deemed inferior. Their ringleader was Clayton Morris, a handsome man of 23 with dark hair and darker intentions, whose family owned one of the larger ranches in the area. Clayton had never worked an honest day in his life, living off his father's success, while pretending the swagger and confidence he displayed came from his own merit. Emma tried to time her walks through town to avoid them, but Julian's Main Street was unavoidable if she needed to get from the hotel to her aunt's small house on the eastern edge of town, or to the general store, or to the church where she found what little solace her life afforded. On a warm September evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and the air cooled with the promise of autumn, Emma finished her shift and began the walk home. Her hip ached more than usual, the result of spending the afternoon on her hands and knees scrubbing the hotel's lobby floor after a group of miners had tracked in half the mountain. She was halfway down the wooden sidewalk when she heard Clayton's voice ring out. "Well, look here, boys. It is our little crippled bird trying to fly home." Emma kept her eyes forward and continued walking, each step a careful negotiation between her good leg and her damaged one. The uneven gait had become second nature over the years, a rhythm she had learned to maintain despite the pain. "I am talking to you, Emma," Clayton called, his words slightly slurred. His friends laughed, that particular brand of cruel laughter that feeds on itself and grows louder with each echo. She made the mistake of glancing in their direction. Clayton had stepped off the saloon's porch and was walking toward her, his gait exaggerated and uneven, a mocking imitation of her limp. His friends howled with laughter, slapping their knees and encouraging him with whistles and shouts. "This is how you look," Clayton said, dragging one leg behind him with theatrical flourish. "Hobbling around like a three-legged dog. Tell me, do you chase rabbits too?" Heat flooded Emma's cheeks, but she had learned long ago that responding only made it worse. She turned her attention back to the sidewalk ahead and continued moving, but Clayton had worked himself into the performance now, energized by his audience. He lurched along beside her, his imitation growing more grotesque. "Maybe if you tried harder, you could walk like a normal person," he said. "Or maybe you just like the attention. Is that it, Emma? You want people to notice you? Leave her alone, Clayton." The voice came from behind them, deep and steady, with an accent that suggested roots somewhere in Texas or Oklahoma. Emma did not turn around, but Clayton stopped his performance and straightened up, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation. "This does not concern you, Lawson," Clayton said. Emma risked a glance over her shoulder and saw a tall man standing in the street, his hands relaxed at his sides. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, trail-dusty denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded a face she could not quite make out in the fading light. She did not recognize him, which meant he was new to Julian, probably one of the hands hired for the fall cattle drive. "I am making it my concern," the stranger said, taking a few steps closer. Now Emma could see his features more clearly. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with a few days of stubble, and eyes that were a startling shade of blue even in the dimming light. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with a man who knew exactly who he was and felt no need to prove it. Clayton's friends had gone quiet, watching to see how their leader would handle this challenge. Clayton himself seemed to be calculating his options, weighing his pride against the possibility of a fight he might not win. The stranger did not look particularly large, perhaps 6 feet tall with the lean build of someone who spent their days in the saddle, but there was something in his eyes that suggested crossing him would be a mistake. "The girl and I were just having a conversation," Clayton said, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "That was not a conversation," the stranger replied. "That was you being cruel because you have got an audience and not enough character to be better." The words hung in the air like smoke. Clayton's face flushed red, and for a moment Emma thought he might actually throw a punch, but one of his friends grabbed his arm and muttered something about his father hearing about another fight. Clayton shook off the hand but took a step back. "You just made an enemy, Lawson," he said. "Ask around town. That is not a smart thing to do." "I will take my chances," the stranger said. Clayton stared at him for another long moment, then turned and stalked back to the saloon, his friends trailing after him like ducklings following their mother. Emma stood frozen on the sidewalk, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure whether she should thank the stranger or simply continue on her way. She had learned to be wary of kindness from men, as it so often came with expectations attached. The stranger turned his attention to her, and his expression softened. He removed his hat, revealing more of his face, and Emma was struck by the openness she saw there. No pity, no calculation, just a simple human kindness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "I apologize if I overstepped," he said. "I could not stand by and watch that." "Thank you," Emma managed, her voice quieter than she intended. "You did not have to do that." "Maybe not, but it was the right thing to do." He took a few steps closer, moving with an easy grace. "My name is Frank Lawson. I am working at the Patterson Ranch down in the valley." Emma Zimmerman, she replied. I work at the Silver Creek Hotel. Frank nodded, his eyes never leaving her face, never dropping to look at her leg or her uneven stance. May I walk with you? He asked. I am heading in the direction of the livery stable, and I imagine after that little scene you might appreciate some company. Emma hesitated. Every instinct told her to politely decline, to maintain the walls she had built around herself over the years. But there was something about Frank that made her want to trust him, something in the way he had stood up to Clayton without making a show of it, without demanding her gratitude or admiration. All right, she said. They began walking, and Emma immediately felt self-conscious about her limp, about the way she had to swing her hip to move her leg forward, about the soft sound her boot made when it dragged slightly across the wooden planks. She tried to move faster to minimize the awkwardness, but her body would not cooperate. Emma, Frank said softly, and she glanced at him. He had slowed his pace, adjusting his stride to match hers. Walk beside me. I will match your pace. The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were so unexpectedly kind. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. No one had ever offered to slow down for her. Her aunt complained constantly about how long it took Emma to walk anywhere. Mrs. Crawford had suggested more than once that Emma needed to move faster if she wanted to keep her job. Even the church women, with their practiced pity, would walk ahead and then stop to wait, making a show of their patience. But Frank simply adjusted his long stride to match her shorter, uneven one, and continued the conversation as if it were the most natural thing in the world. How long have you lived in Julian? He asked. All my life, Emma replied, still processing what he had done, what he had said. I was born here back when it was still mostly a mining camp. My father worked the claims up in the hills. It is beautiful country, Frank said, looking up at the mountains that surrounded the town. Different from what I am used to. I grew up outside of Fort Worth, Texas. The land there is flat and goes on forever. These mountains make me feel like I am in a different world. What brought you to California? Emma asked, grateful to focus on something other than herself. Work mostly, Frank said. I have been working cattle since I was 15. My father had a small spread, but there were 4 boys and not enough land to divide among us all. My older brother will inherit, which is as it should be. The rest of us had to make our own way. I have been moving west for a few years now, working different ranches, learning different country. Mr. Patterson hired me 3 weeks ago to help with the fall drive. If I do good work, he says there might be a permanent position. They had reached the end of the main street, where the sidewalk gave way to the dirt road that led to the residential areas of town. Frank paused, and Emma realized the livery stable was in the opposite direction from where they were headed. You said you were going to the livery, she said. I was, Frank admitted, and had the grace to look slightly sheepish. But it can wait. I would like to see you home safely if you will allow it. Emma should have said no. She should have thanked him and sent him on his way. Instead, she found herself nodding, and they continued walking together through the dusty streets of Julian as the sun finally slipped behind the mountains, and the first stars began to appear. May I ask what happened? Frank said after a while. To your leg, I mean. You do not have to tell me if you would rather not. I was shot, Emma said simply. 6 years ago, crossfire between 2 miners. The bullet went through my hip and shattered the bone. The doctor did what he could, but I will always walk like this. I am sorry, Frank said, and the words carried genuine weight. That must have been terrifying. It was, Emma admitted, but the physical pain was not the worst part. It was everything that came after, the way people look at me, the things they say, the opportunities that disappeared. People can be cruel, Frank said. especially when they are small-minded and looking for someone to feel superior to. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Emma found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. Frank kept his pace matched to hers, never rushing, never showing impatience. When they reached her aunt's house, a small wood-frame structure badly in need of paint, Emma stopped at the gate. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For standing up to Clayton, for walking me home, for treating me like a normal person." "You are a normal person," Frank said, his blue eyes serious. "You are a person who was hurt and who has had to live with the consequences through no fault of your own. That does not make you less than anyone else, no matter what small-minded fools like Clayton Morris might think." Emma felt tears threatening again and swallowed hard. "I should go inside," she said. "My aunt will be wondering where I am." "May I see you again?" Frank asked. "Perhaps on Sunday after church. I could buy you lunch at the hotel restaurant." "You want to be seen with me?" Emma asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. "I want to spend time with you," Frank said. "I want to talk with you to get to know you better." "I understand if you would rather not, but I am asking." Emma looked at him, this stranger who had appeared in her life like a character from one of the dime novels she sometimes read when the hotel was quiet. She knew she should be cautious, should protect herself from inevitable disappointment. But something in her chest was unfurling like a flower toward sunlight, something that had been closed for so long she had forgotten it existed. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." Frank's smile was like sunrise, gradual and warm and illuminating. "Then I will see you Sunday," he said. He tipped his hat to her and turned to walk back toward town, his figure growing smaller in the gathering darkness. Emma stood at the gate for a long moment, watching him go, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating faster than it had in years. Then she heard her aunt's voice calling from inside the house, sharp and impatient, and the spell was broken. She pushed open the gate and limped up the path, but for once the limp did not feel like a burden. It felt like just another part of who she was, neither more nor less important than the color of her eyes or the length of her hair. Sunday came both too slowly and too quickly. Emma spent Saturday in a state of nervous anticipation that made Mrs. Crawford ask if she was feeling ill. She was not ill, just terrified and excited in equal measure, emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in so long she barely knew what to do with them. She washed and pressed her best dress, a simple gray cotton with white collar and cuffs that had been her mother's before she left for San Francisco. She brushed her dark brown hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style she hoped looked neat rather than severe. Her aunt, Martha Zimmerman, was a bitter woman who had never married and seemed to resent anyone who had even the possibility of happiness. When Emma mentioned she would not be home for Sunday lunch, Martha's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "Some man, I suppose," she said, stirring a pot of beans with more vigor than necessary. "You think you are going to find a husband, girl? No man wants damaged goods. The sooner you accept that, the better off you will be." The words stung as they were meant to, but Emma had Frank's voice in her head now, his steady assertion that she was a normal person, worthy of respect and kindness. She lifted her chin and met her aunt's sour gaze. "A friend invited me to lunch," she said. "I will be back by evening to help with supper." She left before Martha could respond, stepping out into the bright September morning. The church service seemed to last forever, the minister droning on about sin and redemption while Emma's mind wandered to Frank, to the way he had looked at her, to the way he had slowed his pace to walk beside her. She wondered if he would actually come, or if he had thought better of the invitation in the days since he made it. When the service finally ended and Emma stepped out into the sunshine, she saw Frank immediately. He was standing across the street from the church, leaning against a post with his hat in his hands. He had cleaned up since their last meeting, wearing dark pants and a white shirt that looked freshly laundered, his hair combed back and his jaw cleanly shaved. When he saw her, he straightened and crossed the street, weaving between the church-goers with easy confidence. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, and the formality made her smile. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Emma said, feeling her cheeks warm. "You look very nice yourself. Shall we?" Frank offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma took it. She was immediately aware of how close he was, of the warmth of his body and the solid strength of his arm beneath her hand. They walked slowly toward the hotel restaurant, and Emma tried not to notice the stares they attracted, the whispers that followed in their wake. Julian was a small town, and a strange cowboy walking arm in arm with the crippled girl was exactly the kind of gossip that would fuel conversations for days. If Frank noticed the attention, he gave no sign of it. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Emma about her work at the hotel, about Julian's history, about the best places to ride in the surrounding mountains. By the time they reached the restaurant, Emma had almost forgotten to be self-conscious. The Silver Creek Hotel's restaurant was the nicest eating establishment in Julian, with white tablecloths and actual china plates. Emma had served meals here on busy days when the regular waitress needed help, but she had never eaten here as a guest. The owner, Mrs. Crawford's husband Thomas, showed them to a table by the window with a view of the main street. He raised an eyebrow at seeing Emma but was too professional to comment. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Emma found herself talking more freely than she had in years. Frank had a way of asking questions that invited real answers, not polite deflections. He wanted to know about her childhood before the accident, about what she had dreamed of becoming, about the books she liked to read, and the places she had never been but longed to see. "I always wanted to travel," Emma admitted, cutting a piece of chicken into smaller bites. "My mother used to tell me stories about San Francisco, about the ocean and the big ships that came from all over the world. I wanted to see that. I wanted to see everything. What is stopping you?" Frank asked. Emma gestured at her leg. "This, obviously. I can barely walk across town. How could I possibly travel?" "People travel all kinds of ways," Frank said. "Trains, wagons, horses, ships. None of those require you to walk any particular way." "The question is not whether you can travel, Emma. The question is whether you believe you deserve to." The words struck deep, hitting a truth Emma had been avoiding for years. She had let her injury become an excuse, a reason to stop dreaming, to stop hoping for anything beyond the narrow confines of her current existence. "I suppose I have not thought about it that way," she said quietly. "Maybe you should," Frank said, his blue eyes warm. "You have got a sharp mind and a kind heart, Emma Zimmerman. Those are worth more than 2 good legs any day." They talked through the meal and well into the afternoon, until the restaurant began to fill with the early supper crowd, and Thomas Crawford started giving them pointed looks. Frank paid for their meal over Emma's protests, and they walked out into the late afternoon sunshine. "Would you like to walk a bit?" Frank asked. "I know a place up at the edge of town where you can see the whole valley. It is not far and the view is worth the effort." Emma hesitated, thinking of her aunt waiting at home, of the gossip that would surely follow if she spent any more time with Frank. Then she thought of what Frank had said about deserving good things, about not letting fear and other people's opinions dictate her life. "I would like that," she said. The place Frank mentioned was a small overlook just beyond the last houses on the northern edge of Julian. The path was rough and Emma had to watch her footing carefully, but Frank stayed close beside her, offering his arm over the difficult parts. When they reached the top, Emma caught her breath at the view. The valley spread out below them, golden in the late afternoon light, with cattle grazing in distant pastures and the ribbon of a creek winding through the grassland. Beyond the valley, more mountains rose up, layer upon layer fading into the blue distance. "It is beautiful," Emma breathed. "It is," Frank agreed, but when Emma glanced at him, he was looking at her instead of the view. They stood in silence for a while, and Emma felt something shifting inside her, walls beginning to crumble that she had built so carefully over the years. She was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "Frank," she said carefully, "why did you ask me to lunch? I know what people in this town think of me. I know what I look like when I walk. Why would you want to be seen with me?" Frank turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because when I look at you, I do not see a limp," he said. "I see a woman who was dealt a terrible hand and who has survived it with grace and dignity. I see someone who is kind despite having every reason to be bitter. I see someone I want to know better, someone who interests me and intrigues me in ways that have nothing to do with how you walk." "You barely know me," Emma whispered. "Then let me know you better," Frank said. "Let me spend time with you. Let me prove to you that not everyone in the world is like Clayton Morris and his crowd of fools." Emma wanted to say yes. She wanted to throw caution to the wind and let herself fall into whatever this was becoming. But fear held her back, fear of being hurt, fear of hoping too much, fear of what would happen when Frank inevitably realized she was not worth the trouble. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I know," Frank said gently, "but fear is not a reason to say no. It is just a feeling, Emma. It does not have to control you." He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Emma looked at his hand, at his face, at the earnest hope in his eyes. Then she placed her hand in his and felt his fingers close, warm and secure around hers. "I would like to know you better too," she said. Frank's smile could have lit the entire valley. They stood there as the sun sank lower, hands clasped, looking out over the beautiful wild country, and Emma felt something inside her begin to heal. Over the following weeks, Frank became a constant presence in Emma's life. He would wait for her after her shifts at the hotel, walking her home with that same careful matching of pace that had stolen her heart the first evening. On Sundays, they would have lunch, and then spend the afternoon walking or sitting on the overlook, talking about everything and nothing. Frank told her about growing up in Texas, about his brothers and his parents, about the horses he had known and the country he had crossed. Emma told him about Julian, about the gold rush days her father used to describe, about the books she borrowed from the church library and read by lamplight when her aunt was asleep. The town noticed, of course. Gossip spread like wildfire through Julian's small population. Some people thought it was sweet, the handsome cowboy courting the crippled girl. Others thought Frank was either crazy or had some ulterior motive. Clayton Morris and his friends made crude jokes whenever Emma passed the saloon, but Frank's presence and his willingness to confront them had taken some of the venom out of their mockery. Mrs. Crawford called Emma into her office one afternoon in early October, gesturing for her to close the door and sit down. The older woman studied her for a long moment before speaking. "This cowboy who has been courting you," she said. "Frank Lawson. Do you know anything about him?" "I know he is a good man," Emma said, defensive despite herself. "That may be," Mrs. Crawford said. "But good men can still leave. Cowboys drift, Emma. It is in their nature. They work a season, earn their pay, and move on to the next job. Do not give your heart to someone who is not planning to stay." The words haunted Emma because they touched on her deepest fear, the one she had not wanted to acknowledge. Frank had never said anything about the future beyond the next Sunday, the next walk, the next conversation. What would happen when the cattle drive ended and the ranch no longer needed extra hands? Would Frank move on to the next town, the next job, the next adventure, leaving Emma behind like a pleasant memory? She tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the present moment and the genuine happiness she felt when she was with Frank. But the doubts had taken root, growing in the quiet hours of the night when she lay awake in her narrow bed and listened to her aunt snoring in the next room. Frank must have sensed the change in her, the new reserve that crept into her manner. After church one Sunday in mid-October, he suggested they ride out to the Patterson ranch so Emma could see where he worked. Emma had not been on a horse since before her injury, and the thought terrified her, but Frank assured her he would find a gentle mount and stay right beside her. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of an hour, with Emma perched nervously on a placid mare named Daisy while Frank rode beside her on his own horse, a leggy bay gelding he called Red. To Emma's surprise, riding was easier than walking. The horse did all the work, and while her hip ached from the unfamiliar position, it was manageable. The Patterson ranch was larger than Emma had imagined, with a substantial house, multiple barns, and extensive corrals. Mr. Patterson himself came out to greet them, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "So you are the young lady Frank cannot stop talking about," he said, making Emma blush. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Zimmerman. Frank here is one of the best hands I have hired in years. I would hate to lose him." "Lose him," Emma repeated, her heart sinking. "Well, the drive is finished now," Mr. Patterson said. "Most of the seasonal men will be moving on at the end of the month. But I have offered Frank a permanent position if he wants it. Ranch foreman with housing and good wages. He has not given me his answer yet." Emma glanced at Frank, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting Red's saddle. Mr. Patterson seemed to sense the sudden tension and excused himself, leaving them standing in the ranch yard. "You did not tell me," Emma said quietly. "I wanted to," Frank said, finally meeting her eyes. "But I did not know how. I did not want to assume anything, Emma. I did not want you to think I was pressuring you." "Pressuring me how?" Frank took a deep breath. "The reason I have not answered Mr. Patterson is because the decision is not just about me anymore. If I take this job, I will be settling down here in Julian. I will be putting down roots, building a life in this place, and I only want to do that if you are going to be part of that life." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am falling in love with you," Frank said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I have been falling in love with you since the first evening I saw you, walking down that street with your head held high despite those fools mocking you. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be a better man. I love you, Emma Zimmerman, and if you will have me, I would like to stay here and court you properly. I would like to build a future with you." Tears were streaming down Emma's face now, years of loneliness and pain and fear washing away in the face of Frank's declaration. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it, so afraid that you would leave or that I was just some passing interest to you. But I love you, Frank. I love you so much it terrifies me." Frank closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I am not going anywhere, not unless you send me away." "I would never do that," Emma said. "Then I am staying," Frank said and kissed her. It was Emma's first kiss, and it was everything the dime novels had promised and more. Soft and sweet and full of promise, it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Frank was grinning like a fool and Emma could not stop smiling. I should probably ask you properly, Frank said. Emma Zimmerman, may I court you with the intention of marriage? Yes, Emma said, laughing through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that Emma had never imagined possible. Frank accepted the foreman position and moved into the small house on the Patterson ranch that came with the job. He spent every spare moment with Emma, their courtship conducted under the watchful eyes of the entire town. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Others remained skeptical, waiting for the relationship to fail so they could say they had known it all along. Clayton Morris was particularly bitter about the development. He had apparently assumed Frank would leave eventually, that things would return to normal, and he could resume his cruel entertainment. Instead, Frank was now in a position of some authority in the area, respected by Mr. Patterson and the other ranchers. When Clayton tried his old tricks one evening in November, calling out to Emma as she walked home from the hotel, Frank appeared as if summoned. "Morris," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clear threat. "I have been patient with you because I do not believe in unnecessary violence, but my patience has limits. If I ever hear you speak to Emma with anything less than complete respect, if I ever see you mock her or anyone else for something beyond their control, I will personally ensure you regret it. Are we clear?" Clayton, backed by his usual crowd of friends, tried to muster some bravado. "You threatening me, Lawson?" "I am making you a promise," Frank said. "Test me if you like, but I guarantee you will not enjoy the results." Something in Frank's eyes must have convinced Clayton he was serious, because the younger man backed down, muttering under his breath but causing no further trouble. After that evening, the mocking stopped. Clayton and his friends still congregated at the saloon, but they left Emma alone, which was all she had ever wanted. Christmas came, and Frank gave Emma a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of good pens, encouraging her to write down her thoughts and stories. Emma gave him a hand-knitted scarf in dark blue to match his eyes, and they spent Christmas Day at the Patterson Ranch with the family, eating too much food and laughing at the antics of the Pattersons' 3 young grandchildren who were visiting from San Diego. Winter in Julian was cold but not harsh, with occasional snow in the higher elevations and frosty mornings in the valley. Frank taught Emma to ride more confidently, and they would take long rides through the countryside on Sunday afternoons, exploring the canyons and meadows that surrounded the town. Emma's hip still ached and she still limped when she walked, but on horseback she felt free in a way she had not experienced since before her injury. In February, Frank proposed officially. He took Emma up to their overlook on a clear Sunday afternoon when the valley was dressed in winter gold and the air was so crisp it almost hurt to breathe. He got down on one knee, right there in the dust and scrub grass, and pulled out a simple gold band. "I know I already asked if I could court you with intention," he said, "and you said yes, but now I am asking you to make it permanent. Emma Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life proving to you every single day that you are loved and valued and cherished?" Emma could barely see him through her tears, but she pulled him to his feet and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in April of 1879, in the small Julian church with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Even Martha had softened somewhat, perhaps realizing that Emma's marriage would free her from the obligation of housing her niece. Mrs. Crawford gave Emma a beautiful white dress as a wedding gift, claiming it had been her daughter's before the girl moved east and would never use it. Emma wore it with her hair down and wildflowers in her hands, and when she walked down the aisle toward Frank, she did not try to hide her limp. It was part of who she was, part of her story, and Frank loved her not despite it but including it. The ceremony was short and sweet, conducted by the same minister who had droned through so many services Emma had endured. But this time, his words seemed to carry weight and meaning. When he pronounced them husband and wife and Frank kissed her in front of God and everyone, Emma felt as if her whole life had been leading to this moment. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Emma could not dance the way the other women did, but Frank held her close and they swayed together to the music, and it felt like dancing to her. Mr. Patterson made a toast wishing them happiness and many children. Mrs. Crawford wiped away tears she probably thought no one noticed. Even Clayton Morris, standing in the back of the room with a glass of whiskey, raised it slightly in acknowledgement before slipping out into the night. Frank had prepared the foreman's house for Emma's arrival, cleaning and fixing everything that needed attention. It was small but cozy, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room with a fireplace. Emma had never had a space that was truly her own, and the house felt like a palace. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Frank patient and gentle with Emma's inexperience and nervousness. He made her feel beautiful and desired in ways she had never imagined possible. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Emma felt a peace she had never known. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Frank asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "For seeing me," Emma said. "For matching my pace. For loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Frank replied, kissing the top of her head. "You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Emma Lawson." Emma Lawson. She repeated the name in her mind, loving the sound of it, loving the way it marked a new chapter in her life. She was no longer Emma Zimmerman, the crippled girl who lived with her aunt and cleaned hotel rooms. She was Emma Lawson, wife of Frank Lawson, ranch foreman, beloved and cherished and whole. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months and years. Emma continued working at the hotel for a while, saving money and enjoying the work now that she had a real home to return to each evening. Frank's position as foreman kept him busy, but he was home most nights for supper, and they spent their evenings reading together by the fire or talking about their days. In the summer of 1880, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She had never thought about having children, had assumed it was not in the cards for her. But Frank was overjoyed, his excitement infectious. He built a cradle from oak wood, spending his evenings in the barn workshop sanding and finishing until it was smooth as silk. The pregnancy was difficult. Emma's hip and leg ached more than usual with the extra weight, and she had to stop working at the hotel in her 7th month because the physical labor became too much. But Frank was attentive and caring, taking over household tasks without complaint and rubbing her aching hip each evening until she could finally fall asleep. Their son was born in February of 1881, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and a surprisingly strong set of lungs. They named him Samuel, after Frank's father, and called him Sam. Frank cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he looked at Emma with such love and gratitude that it took her breath away. "You have given me everything," he said. "Everything I ever wanted, and things I did not even know to hope for." Sam was a fussy baby who seemed to sleep only when being walked around the house, which meant many nights of Frank or Emma pacing the floors with him. Emma worried constantly that she would not be able to keep up with a child once he became mobile, that her limp would somehow handicap his childhood. But Frank dismissed her fears. "Children do not care if their mother walks with a limp," he said. "They care if she loves them and pays attention to them and keeps them safe. "You will be a wonderful mother, Emma." And she was. Sam grew into a curious, energetic toddler who seemed to be in constant motion. Emma learned to adapt, finding ways to chase after him that did not aggravate her hip too badly. When Sam learned to walk, mimicking his mother's uneven gait in the way children do, Emma held her breath waiting for him to be mocked. But the children of Julian had grown up seeing Emma with Frank, had been taught by their parents that she was the ranch foreman's respected wife. Sam's temporary imitation was just a phase, and he soon developed his own steady stride. In 1883, Emma gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a calmer baby than Sam had been, content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. Emma loved both her children fiercely, marveling at how she had gone from believing herself unworthy of love to being surrounded by it. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life, seasons turning and children growing. Sam became fascinated with horses and spent every moment he could with his father, learning to ride and rope and work cattle. Grace was quieter, preferring books and drawing, and Emma saw herself in her daughter's thoughtful nature. In 1885, when Sam was 4 and Grace was 2, Emma started a small school in their home for the children of ranch families who lived too far from town to attend the regular school. It started with just 3 students besides her own children, but word spread about the quality of her teaching. Soon she had 8 students, then 12, meeting in her sitting room each weekday morning. Frank built an addition onto their house to serve as a proper classroom, and Emma found a new purpose in teaching these children, many of whom would never have had access to education otherwise. Clayton Morris, who had inherited his father's ranch when the old man died in 1884, caused one last bit of trouble in the spring of 1886. He had married a woman from San Diego and brought her back to Julian, but the marriage was clearly unhappy. Clayton had not changed his essential nature, and his cruelty had simply found a new target in his wife. When Frank discovered that Clayton was mistreating the woman, he confronted him much as he had all those years ago. But this time, Clayton was drunk enough and angry enough to throw a punch. The fight was brief but brutal, ending with Clayton on the ground and Frank standing over him breathing hard. "You have one chance," Frank told him. "Treat your wife with respect, or I will make sure every rancher in this valley knows what kind of man you really are. Your cattle business will dry up faster than a desert spring. Do better, Clayton. For once in your miserable life, do better." Whether Clayton actually changed or simply became better at hiding his nature, Emma never knew. But his wife seemed happier after that, and when Emma ran into her at the general store, the woman thanked her quietly for having married a good man. "There are not many of them," she said. "You are lucky." "I know," Emma replied, and she did know. Every single day she knew how lucky she was. In 1888, their third child was born, another boy they named Thomas after Mr. Patterson, who had become like a father to Frank. Thomas was a happy baby who grew into a sweet-natured boy, content to toddle after his older siblings and try to keep up with their games. Life was not without its difficulties. There were lean years when the cattle prices dropped and money was tight. There were droughts that made water scarce and tempers short. Emma's hip never stopped aching, and there were days when the pain was bad enough that she could barely walk at all. But through it all, Frank was there, steady and loving and true to the promise he had made that first evening in Julian. "Walk beside me," he would say on the hard days. "I will match your pace," and he always did. Whether it was literally walking together down Julian's Main Street, now with 3 children in tow, or metaphorically navigating the challenges life threw at them, Frank always adjusted his pace to match hers. He never rushed ahead or left her behind. They moved through life as partners, as equals, as two people who had found each other against all odds. Sam grew into a fine young man who took over more and more responsibilities on the ranch. Mr. Patterson, now in his 70s, began talking about retirement and hinted strongly that Frank should consider buying the ranch when the time came. Grace, at 12, was already talking about becoming a teacher like her mother. Thomas, at 6, was still young enough to believe he could be anything he wanted, announcing new career aspirations almost daily. In the summer of 1894, on a warm evening much like the one when they had first met, Frank and Emma sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the valley. Sam was out with the cattle, Grace was inside reading, and Thomas was catching fireflies in the yard. Emma's hair had threads of gray now, and Frank's face was lined from years of working in the sun, but to Emma, he was still the handsome cowboy who had stood up for her when no one else would. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "Staying here, settling down. You always talked about drifting, about seeing new country." Frank reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Not for one single second," he said. "You and these children, this life we have built together, it is worth more than all the new country in the world. You are my adventure, Emma. You have been from the beginning." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it felt like not to love you." "Good," Frank said, kissing the top of her head just as he had on their wedding night all those years ago. "Because I plan to spend every remaining day of my life loving you back." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Thomas abandoned his firefly hunting and came to sit on the porch steps, and Grace emerged from the house with her book to join them. When Sam returned from the range, dusty and tired but grinning at some joke one of the hands had told, he sat on the porch rail and recounted his day. Emma looked around at her family, at the home she had never thought she would have, at the life she had never dared to dream of. She thought about that frightened, lonely girl who had walked down Julian's Main Street 16 years ago, mocked and dismissed and believing herself unworthy of love. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what the future held, tell her that one day a cowboy with blue eyes and a kind heart would say, "Walk beside me. I will match your pace," and mean it for the rest of his life. But perhaps that girl had needed to walk the hard path first, needed to learn her own strength before she could accept someone else's love. Perhaps everything had happened exactly as it needed to, leading her to this porch, this moment, this beautiful life. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked softly, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Everything," Emma said. "How lucky I am, how grateful I am, how I would not change a single thing, not even the hard parts, because they led me here." "Here is pretty good," Frank agreed, pulling her closer. "Here is perfect," Emma corrected. And it was. Not perfect in the sense of flawless or easy, but perfect in the sense of being exactly right for them. A life built on kindness and respect and genuine love. A life where disabilities did not diminish worth, where differences were accepted rather than mocked, where two people could walk side by side at whatever pace they needed, and know they would never have to walk alone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and the children's voices rose and fell in conversation, Emma closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the universe. For Frank, for her children, for the community that had eventually come to accept her, for the courage to say yes when she had wanted to say no out of fear. The years continued to roll by with the inevitability of seasons changing. By 1900, Sam had married a rancher's daughter named Catherine, and was running the day-to-day operations of the Patterson Ranch, which Frank had indeed purchased in 1895, when Mr. Patterson finally retired to live with his daughter in San Diego. Grace had become a teacher as she had dreamed, teaching at the regular school in Julian now that Emma's small school had closed, the need for it diminishing as the community grew and organized. Thomas, at 18, had surprised everyone by developing a talent for carpentry, and was apprenticing with a builder in San Diego, coming home every few months to visit. Emma and Frank, now in their early 40s, had stepped back from the most demanding work, though Frank still consulted on ranch decisions, and Emma still tutored students who needed extra help. Their life had settled into a peaceful rhythm, and they had more time to spend together, taking long rides through the countryside. They both loved or simply sitting on their porch and watching the world go by. In the spring of 1902, Sam and Catherine gave them their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Emma after her grandmother. When Frank placed the infant in Emma's arms for the first time, she wept at the miracle of it, this tiny life that carried her name and her legacy forward into the future. "Our granddaughter," Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Emma admitted, gazing down at the baby's perfect face. "It seems like just yesterday we were young and starting our own family. How did we get here so fast?" "By living every day as fully as we could," Frank said. "By loving each other and our children and building something that lasts." And it had lasted. Through the changing times, through the new century, through all the challenges and joys that life had brought them, their love had endured and deepened. They had proven that a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, on the willingness to adjust pace and walk together through whatever came, was strong enough to withstand anything. Little Emma was followed by 2 more grandchildren over the next few years, Sam and Catherine's son Daniel in 1904, and Grace's daughter Rose in 1906, after Grace married a fellow teacher named Marcus. Thomas remained unmarried, claiming he was too busy building houses to build a family, but Emma suspected he was simply waiting to find what his parents had, the kind of love worth waiting for. On their 25th wedding anniversary in April of 1904, the whole family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the rooms with noise and laughter. Friends from town and neighboring ranches came to pay their respects and share in the joy. Even Mrs. Crawford, now retired and living with her daughter, attended, telling anyone who would listen that she had known from the start Frank and Emma were meant for each other. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Emma found herself once again on the porch with Frank, the 2 of them alone for the first time all day. The spring evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadows. 25 years, Frank said wonderingly, a quarter of a century, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I was just thinking the same thing, Emma said. Though I did not think it was possible to love you more than I did then, I thought my heart was already full. Hearts expand, Frank said. They grow to hold all the love we need them to. Mine has grown to hold you, our children, our grandchildren, this life we have built, and there is still room for more. They sat in companionable silence, hands clasped as they had been so many times over the years. Emma's hip still ached, would always ache, but it had long since stopped defining her. She was so much more than her injury, so much more than the limp that still marked her steps. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a teacher, a friend, a valued member of her community. She was, as Frank had told her all those years ago, a normal person living a normal life, and the fact that she walked differently had ultimately changed nothing that mattered. You remember what you said to me that first night? Emma asked. When you walked me home from the saloon. I said a lot of things, Frank replied. Which part? Walk beside me, I will match your pace, Emma said. You have kept that promise every single day of our marriage. It was not a difficult promise to keep, Frank said. Matching your pace meant I got to spend my life beside you. That was never a sacrifice, Emma. It was always a gift. Emma turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely, and saw in his eyes the same love and devotion she had seen from the beginning. Age had marked them both, lines and gray hair and the inevitable wearing down of bodies that had worked hard for decades. But the essence of who they were, the love that bound them together, remained as strong as ever. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. For seeing me when I thought I was invisible. For loving me when I thought I was unlovable. For giving me this life. Thank you for saying yes, Frank replied. For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy. For building this family with me. For being my partner in everything. They kissed as the stars began to appear, a kiss that held 25 years of love and thousands of smaller kisses, a kiss that promised whatever years remained would be walked together, pace matched, side by side. The years that followed brought their share of sorrows along with the joys. Emma's Aunt Martha died in 1907, bitter to the end, but leaving Emma a small amount of money that she donated to the church for a fund to help injured workers and their families. Mr. Patterson passed in 1909 at the age of 92, having lived long enough to see the ranch he built thriving under Frank's stewardship. Mrs. Crawford followed in 1911, and Emma wept at her funeral, remembering the stern woman who had given her a job when few others would and a wedding dress when she needed one. But there were joys, too. More grandchildren arrived, 7 in total by 1915. Thomas finally married in 1912, a spirited woman named Alice who matched his energy and shared his love of building things. Grace's teaching career flourished, and she was eventually made principal of the Julian school. Sam proved to be as good a rancher as his father, and under his management, the ranch continued to prosper. Emma's health remained relatively good, though her hip continued to trouble her, and she needed a cane for longer walks as she aged. Frank's back ached from years of ranch work, and his hands grew stiff with arthritis. But they adapted, finding new rhythms that accommodated their aging bodies, never complaining about the limitations because they were together. On a summer evening in 1920, Emma and Frank sat on their porch as they had so many times before. They were in their mid-60s now, officially retired, with Sam and Catherine living in the main ranch house and managing all operations. Emma and Frank had moved into a smaller house on the property, closer to town, with a garden Emma tended and a workshop where Frank still occasionally built furniture. You ever think about that first evening? Emma asked, the question she seemed to ask every few years, as if she needed to reassure herself it had really happened. When you stopped Clayton from mocking me, I think about it all the time, Frank said. It was the luckiest day of my life. The day I met you, the day everything changed. I was so afraid, Emma admitted. Afraid to hope, afraid to believe you were real, afraid it would all disappear. But it did not disappear, Frank said. It grew and deepened and became this incredible life. We built something real, Emma, something that will last long after we are gone. Emma nodded, looking out at the land they loved, the mountains rising against the evening sky, the valley spreading out below them. She thought about the generations that would come after them, carrying forward the lessons they had learned about love and respect, and the importance of adjusting your pace to walk beside those you care about. I hope the children remember, she said. I hope they tell their children and their children's children about how important it is to be kind, to see beyond surface differences, to value people for who they are rather than what they look like or how they move through the world. They will remember, Frank assured her. We have shown them by example. That is worth more than any words. As the sun set and the evening cooled, their grandchildren began to arrive for the weekly Sunday supper that had become tradition. 7 grandchildren ranging in age from 18 down to 8, plus assorted spouses as the older ones married, filled the house with noise and life. Emma and Frank presided over the chaos with the contentment of people who had lived fully and loved well. After supper, as the younger children played in the yard and the adults talked on the porch, little Rose, Grace's youngest at 14, came to sit beside Emma. She had always been a thoughtful child given to asking deep questions. "Grandma," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Emma said. "Did it bother you? When you were young, I mean. The way you walk." Emma considered the question carefully. Rose deserved an honest answer. "Yes," she said finally. "It bothered me very much, not the walking itself, but the way people treated me because of it. The way they assumed I was less than others, that I could not have a full life. That hurt more than my hip ever did." "But Grandpa did not think that," Rose said. "No," Emma agreed, smiling at the memory. "He saw me, really saw me from the very beginning. He treated me like a whole person, not a disability. That made all the difference. I want to find someone like that," Rose said wistfully. "Someone who sees me for who I really am." "You will," Emma assured her, pulling the girl close. "Do not settle for less. Wait for someone who makes you feel valued and cherished, who walks beside you at your pace, whatever that pace might be. That kind of love is worth waiting for." Frank, overhearing the conversation, caught Emma's eye and smiled. 41 years after their first meeting, and the love between them was still palpable, still the foundation on which everything else was built. The years continued their inevitable march. The 1920s brought changes to Julian and to the world beyond. The automobile became more common, replacing horses for everyday travel. Electricity came to the ranch, bringing lights that did not need to be filled with oil and appliances that made daily tasks easier. The world was changing faster than it ever had before, but some things remained constant. Emma and Frank's love remained constant. Their family remained constant. The values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren remained constant. In a world of rapid change, they were an anchor, a reminder that some things were eternal. Emma's health began to fail in 1928. Her heart, the doctor said, weakened by age and a lifetime of managing pain. She spent more time resting, less time on her feet. Frank never left her side, adjusting his pace yet again to match hers, finding ways to bring the world to her when she could no longer easily go to it. On a warm spring evening in April of 1929, exactly 50 years after their wedding, Emma and Frank sat together in the small house they had shared for nearly a decade. The whole family had been there earlier, celebrating their golden anniversary with food and flowers and stories. But now it was just the two of them as it had been in the beginning. 50 years, Emma said, her voice weaker than it once was but still full of love. "We made it, Frank. 50 beautiful years." "The best 50 years of my life," Frank said, holding her hand gently. "Every single day with you was a gift." "I was thinking about that girl," Emma said. "The one walking down the street in Julian being mocked for her limp. I was thinking how she could never have imagined this life, this love, this family. How afraid she was, how small she felt." "She was never small," Frank said firmly. "She just had not realized yet how strong she was, but I saw it from the first moment. I saw your strength and your courage and your beautiful spirit." "You changed my life," Emma whispered. You taught me that I was worthy of love. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. You changed mine too, Frank said. You taught me what really matters. Not how far you can drift or how much country you can see, but finding someone worth staying for, someone worth building a life with. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm after 50 years of walking the same path. Emma felt tired, her body ready to rest after nearly 70 years of life, but she felt no fear. She had lived fully, loved completely, and built a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. "Promise me something," she said to Frank. "Anything," he replied. "Promise me you will keep living, keep loving, keep telling our story. Make sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren know that love is real, that kindness matters, that we should always match our pace to walk beside those we care about." "I promise," Frank said, his voice breaking. "But Emma, I do not want to think about a world without you in it." "You will not be without me," Emma said. "I will be in every sunset we watch together, every story you tell, every value you taught our children. I will be in the way Sam runs the ranch, and the way Grace teaches her students, and the way Thomas builds things that last. I will be there, Frank. Always." Emma died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by her family, with Frank holding her hand. She slipped away quietly in the early morning as the sun was just beginning to paint the mountains gold, returning to the earth that had given her so much. Frank mourned her deeply, as did everyone who had known her. The funeral drew people from all over the county, ranchers and townsfolk, former students and their families, all coming to pay respects to a woman who had touched their lives with her kindness and grace. Even some of Clayton Morris's children attended, their father having died years earlier, coming to honor the woman who had shown them what real love looked like. Frank kept his promise to Emma. He lived another 15 years, dying peacefully at the age of 89 in 1944. During those years, he never stopped talking about Emma, never stopped telling their story. He made sure every grandchild and great-grandchild knew how they had met, how he had said, "Walk beside me, I will match your pace," and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into 50 years of love. He taught them that disabilities do not diminish worth, that true love sees the person, not the limitation, that kindness costs nothing but means everything. He made sure they understood that the greatest gift you can give someone is to adjust your pace to walk beside them, to be present and patient and willing to meet them where they are. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. Sam's children ran it after him, and their children after them. In the front yard of the main house, a stone marker was placed, carved with the names Emma Zimmerman Lawson and Frank Lawson, with the dates of their births and deaths, and a simple inscription that captured the essence of their love. They walked together, side by side, for 50 years. The story of Emma and Frank became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. It was the story of the crippled girl and the cowboy who saw past her disability to the beautiful person within. It was the story of how one act of kindness could change 2 lives and ripple out to affect generations. It was the story of real love, the kind that endures and grows and becomes the foundation on which families are built. Julian, California changed over the decades and centuries, growing from a gold mining town into a quiet mountain community known for its apple orchards and small town charm. The Silver Creek Hotel still stood, renovated and modernized but recognizable. The church where Emma and Frank were married still held services every Sunday. The overlook where Frank proposed was now a public park, with a bench inscribed with their names so others could sit and look out over the valley they had loved. And in that valley, on land that had been the Patterson Ranch, and then the Lawson Ranch, and then simply home to generations of their descendants. The story lived on. Children learned about their great-great-great-grandparents who had proven that love sees no limitations, that kindness is the greatest strength, that walking beside someone at their pace is not a sacrifice but an honor. Emma had worried about being remembered, about her limp defining her legacy. But in the end, she was remembered not for how she walked but for how she loved, how she taught, how she raised a family and built a community. She was remembered for her strength and her grace, for the way she transformed pain into purpose and fear into courage. And Frank was remembered not just as the cowboy who married the crippled girl, but as the man who saw worth where others saw weakness, who chose to stay when he could have drifted, who proved that the measure of a man is in how he treats those the world deems less valuable. Their story became a touchstone, a reminder that the most important things in life are not how fast you can move or how far you can go, but who you walk beside and how willing you are to adjust your pace to match theirs. It was a story about compassion and respect, about seeing people for who they truly are rather than what they look like or how they move through the world. In the end, Emma and Frank's legacy was not the ranch or the money or the material things they left behind. Their legacy was the love they shared, the values they instilled, the example they set. It was the way they proved that two imperfect people could build something perfect together, that limitations need not limit love, that the journey matters more than the destination when you are walking side by side with someone who matches your pace and treasures every step. Their story echoed through time, a love story for the ages, proving that in the Wild West of 1878 and in every time and place since, the greatest adventure is not conquering new territory, but opening your heart to another person. The greatest strength is not in how fast you can run, but in being willing to slow down and walk beside someone who needs you. And the greatest treasure is not gold in the hills, but love in your heart and someone to share it with. Emma had been mocked for her limp until a cowboy said, "Walk beside me, I will match your pace." Those simple words had changed everything, transforming loneliness into love, pain into purpose, limitation into possibility. They had built a life together, raised a family, created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And somewhere in the mountains above Julian, California, if you listen carefully on a quiet evening when the light is just right, you might almost hear the echo of their footsteps, walking together side by side, pace perfectly matched, heading home through the beautiful wild country they loved so much, together for all eternity.